lasted from 1975 to 1990. Was your family in Beirut the whole time?
Yes, I grew up in Beirut. We left during the war, in 89. 89, 1991, we left because the war became too impossible to live in Lebanon. So we came here actually. We were in Montreal. So I'm also a Canadian citizen.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes, Canada really welcomed us, and I spent 3 great years here. In spite of everything that was happening in Lebanon, and in spite of the war, I was able to come to school here and have friends and have a normal life for a few years. And so I'm also a Canadian citizen. I'm proud of it.
and we're proud to claim you. What were your family circumstances? What kind of work did your parents do?
My father is an electrical engineer, and my mother is a housewife. And my father has always, dreamt of becoming a filmmaker in a way. Yeah, when he was a kid, but because of, his financial situation, he couldn't travel, he couldn't do this. And my grandfather used to have a small movie theater in Lebanon, but something very humble in the village where I come from. And my father used to tell me how he used to spend hours in this, the projection room, and how he used to, dream through these images that he used to watch, dream of a different life, dream of new horizons. And I think somehow I inherited this love of images from him in a way, and very early I knew that I was going to be a filmmaker, and I decided that this is where I belong, this is what I want to do in life. And so he ended up doing something else because of lack of money and stuff, but somehow I inherited this love from him.
And during the war, when you were still in Beirut, what impact did it have on you as a child to be kept inside? You weren't allowed to go out? Or?
Yes, I think that because of that, we were, sometimes we didn't go to school for a very long time. We were confined, and we couldn't go outside, we couldn't play. We were in shelters most of the time.
Bomb shelters? Right?
Yes. So boredom became a big part of my life. I was bored, and because I was not living my childhood. So TV became a very important part of my life, and I was lucky because I lived right above like a small shop where we used to rent, VHS tapes
Sure.
of films. And so we used to spend hours and hours in this place choosing films and renting the same films over and over and watching films, and it became a big part of my life. And when I understood that in order to create these stories that have nothing to do with your own reality or what you're living, it was to become a filmmaker. I decided very early that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to create stories. I wanted to live other stories, other realities, other things that have nothing to do with my own life and my own perspective. And also when I decided that I wanted to act, maybe it was that same, to become somebody else or live in the body of somebody, or
inhabit some other life.
Some other lives, yeah.
You were still in your teens when the war in Lebanon ended. What was the transition to peace like? I mean, how did you embrace the new normal?
It was a bit strange because you don't feel like you're living a completely normal life, because there's still the reminiscence of what you've been through, and the war is still there somehow. You can still see it in everybody that you know, in the eyes of people that you know, in the eyes of our grandmothers or cousins or neighbors, or especially in the eyes of the mothers around me, because there isn't one family in Lebanon that doesn't have a tragedy related to this war. So I could still feel it, I could still see it, even though we were living somewhat of a normal life. But war is always around you, and we haven't really, I think, until now, we're still living at war in a way, and it's a different kind of war but the weight of that war is still there. I mean, there's been so much blood. It's difficult to just let go and forget.
From the beginning, you're saying you wanted to make movies. What were your models or inspirations?
I think that's why my first film, Caramell, was about women, because I was looking for a model. I was looking for an inspiration. I was trying to understand women more, and I was trying to find a role model, and I couldn't really find it. So I wanted to understand why. So I wrote a film about women in different situations that come from different backgrounds, because I needed to understand women more. I needed to understand our position as women living in the Middle East. I needed to understand why is there so much contradiction between who we want to be and what we end up being, and why is society has such a weight on us, why are we so not at ease, and how you censor yourself and why you censor yourself and you end up being somebody else because of the weight of society and how people look at you, and this finger pointed at you the whole time with you shouldn't do this, you should do that, it's shameful to do this, and so you grow up with this sort of confusion in your head, and you don't allow yourself to be everything you want to be because of you live in the Arab world and you have this weight of what you're supposed to be and how people perceive you. And so I made this film Caramell, and it was about women because I wanted to understand more.
And it was deliberately not about the familiar image of a war-torn country.
Exactly.
You chose not to do that.
Yeah, I chose not to do that because I was believing in a different era, in a different period. I was believing that maybe now the war was behind us. But unfortunately, the last day of shooting, actually, a new war broke out, and it was the 2006 war, and we live in a different kind of war continuously in Lebanon, and it's still not completely, of course, it's not behind us. It's an ongoing war.
Caramell is set, as you're saying, I mean, it's firmly and intimately in the world of women, revolving around a beauty parlor in Beirut, a place where storytelling happens very naturally. But what in particular interested you about that setting?
It was, that somehow forbidden kind of place for men where women can confide very easily because they're, among other women. And I was interested in that relationship with the person that actually takes care of you, does your makeup, does your hair, does your waxing. There's always this sort of intimate relationship because she sees you in your flaws, she sees you in your reality. So I always found that relationship very interesting because I had one with the person that used to take care of me. So I was interested in that relationship. And for me, I used to remember, when I was a kid, the kitchen where all the women used to gather, and then it was this sort of ritual around the waxing and around the caramel. And I used to remember
what is caramel? How does that work?
Caramel, it's the mixture of sugar and lemon. And it's a preparation that you use for waxing, but before you start waxing, because it's sweet and it's like a candy, you eat it first. So I have this memory of us waiting for that candy when we were kids, with all the women of the family, the neighbors, the cousins. It was like a ritual, a gathering for me, and somehow I think this stayed in my head. And when we were writing the film, our film Caramell, I think it was a very inspiring setting for me, and I was digging in my own memories to create all these characters of different women, and now I know I was inspired by the women in my family, the neighbors, the cousins, my grandmothers.
And it works also as a kind of metaphor because it's a salon is a place of transformation,
exactly,
at least in the aesthetic sense, but change is painful, so it works at that level
the
too.
sweet, the bittersweet taste of you know, there's a saying that il faut souffrir pour être belle.
You have to suffer to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. Caramell features 5 women who are each struggling with different problems: loss of virginity, a forbidden relationship with a married man, late romance, all this sort of thing. And they support each other as they discover new possibilities for their lives. It's tender and funny, but also very democratic in the way that the stories are woven together. Is this a reflection of women's relationships, do you think? I mean, their bonds and the way they have to rely on each other?
Yes, I think so. In a way, it's always a reflection of a certain reality. I try as much as I can to be close to things I know, to things I've seen, things I've lived, and so this is the reality of having to steal your moments of happiness, having to survive in a way in a country or in a society where it's not always easy to do what you want to do, and it's always, you know, there's always, like I told you, this contradiction between what you allow yourself to be and what you are really, and it was very much at that moment inspired by a lot of women I know, and what we do to survive, and how we help each other to survive.
Nadine Labaki, the focus is again on women's lives in your second film called Where Do We Go Now? But here you go into very different terrain, and it's overtly political, though with like sort of slightly fable or fairy tale quality. You said it's an idea that came to you with the outbreak of violence in Beirut in 2008. What happened?
You know, it was conflict between 2 political parties that really over hours almost turned into a new civil war. And I was, at that time, I was pregnant with my first child, and I was watching TV, and I felt like I was looking at images of the civil war of 75, and you know, we were seeing people on the streets with weapons and with masks and tires being burned, and I mean, I thought we were on the verge of a new civil war. Luckily, this war lasted only a few days, but during these few days I saw people who were neighbors living in the same, you know, building, living in the same neighborhood, turn into enemies over hours. And these were people that were living together. And in Lebanon, you know, when you're neighbors, it's not like you share everything. Your door is never locked, because you're almost family. You buy the same bread, you breathe the same air, you drink the same water. And I saw these people turning into enemies over hours. So for me, it was, what if my son was now, I don't know, 18, like all these people on the streets, or just killed another mother's son? What would I do to stop him? How would I react? Because it was only natural to want to protect your family, or protect your building, or protect. So what would I do as a mother? And that's how the idea came of this community of women who are going to do everything to stop their men from fighting.
Your movie, Where Do We Go Now, is set in an isolated village, Muslim and Christian, where the church and the mosque stand near each other, but the cemeteries, 2 cemeteries, are filled with young men all too ready to take up arms against each other. And it's a mix of comedy, tragedy, romance, even music and dance numbers. What led you to such a playful treatment of a serious theme?
Maybe because, you know, it's not specifically between Christians and Muslims, but it's talking about the intolerance between people, and it could have happened anywhere in the world. And the idea was to set it in a place where you don't know exactly where it's happening, you don't know the time where it's happening. It's more of a fable, because it's the reality of, you know, the fear you have of that other person, of that person that you don't know, that ritual that you don't know, the fear of other habits. And also, you know, sometimes using humor helps you have the distance that you need and I think through humor sometimes you understand your flaws better, you laugh about your flaws, you laugh about your weaknesses, and it was a way for me to turn it into something less realistic.
And there's a way in which it's a feminist fantasy because the women of the village are strong and resourceful, and the men are hot-headed and mostly foolish. Is that part of your...
I mean, it was important for me to show that, absurd situation. For me, every war is completely absurd, and I think we can find solutions differently. And it's sort of this fantasy of a whole community of women that can bring change, that can make a change happen. We know the codes, we understand each other, we don't need to talk. And it was important that I talk about something that I personally know very well. And the fact that I'm a woman was only normal for me to be talking about a community of women that, understand each other or don't need to talk to come up with a plot. Or just, in the film you see that sometimes we only just look at each other and then we come up with a solution. Yeah.
The women are determined to prevent their husbands and sons from entering into a religious war, in this case. And they go to extreme and often comic lengths to stop the violence. At one point, Amal, the character that you play in the film, a young widow, she explodes. She says, "Have you learned nothing? It's enough to make us lose our faith. You think we're here just to mourn you," addressing the men, "to wear black forever." Well, so is religion the real problem?
I mean, religion is definitely part of the problem. It's not the religion itself, it's the way we interpret religion that is a part of the problem. But it's not only about the religion, it's the fact that we do not tolerate somebody else's ritual, whether it's religion or whether it's the way we behave or the color we wear or it's the fact that you do not tolerate somebody else being different from yourself. And that's the heart of the problem. And for me, it was important that I talk about that. I talk about the fear of the other because it comes out of ignorance. And it's, these scenes that you are talking about, that scene with Amal shouting at the men and saying, "Have you not learned? Have you not learned from your mistakes?" It's really inspired by women around me that I've seen wearing black until now because they have lost a child or they have lost a brother. And you see this pattern repeating itself as if, we haven't learned anything. And it's really... I've had in my family women that have, seen their sons brought back in the trunk of a car in the name of a certain party, of a certain religion. And I wonder how they find strength to keep going and how they find strength to go on in their lives. And it's really inspired by everything that I hear them say and the way they express themselves and the anger they still have. And it was a sort of homage, a tribute to all these women that I know.
I'd like to talk briefly about your method that you established in these first two films, your casting of non-professional performers, non-professional actors, the kind of improvisation that even goes on during shooting. You've achieved some remarkable results. I mean, you co-write the script, but you don't want your performers to memorize their lines. So from the beginning, were you able to trust you could get what you needed from them?
Yes, I mean, trust is a very important thing in my relationship with my actors. That's why I'm able to draw these performances from them. It's love, it's trust, and most of the time they're not professional actors. There's people that are acting for the first time. And for me, it's a mixture of improvisations, and it's a mixture of just, explaining to them the situation and trying to draw from them, their own experience, trying to put their own experience in a certain situation. And I don't want them to act. I just want them to be who they are in a certain situation and to bring their own experience, to bring their own, language, to bring their own way of talking into that situation. Maybe it's a way of maybe believing more in what I'm doing, believing that what's happening could have really happened, and I'm not I'm not manipulating them or what they're doing into my fiction. Of course, there's a written fiction and there's a written script, but you have to navigate it, and it's always a thin line between reality and fiction, and I try to navigate between them, and I mean, I like doing that.
Lebanese filmmaker Nadine Labaki with me at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2018. You're listening to Writers and Company on CBC Radio 1 and anytime on the CBC Listen app. I'm Eleanor Wachtel. Now back to our conversation. Nadine Labaki, you've talked about the anger that has fueled your work and that inspires you and becomes an obsession, which turns into a story. In your new film, Capernaum, that anger is palpable. Where did it begin?
I think it's an anger that I'm not the only one feeling, because I think it's, this vision of, these children that are facing extreme neglect everywhere around us on the streets, this vision of all these people who are excluded from the system, who are paperless, who are somehow, hanging outside the system,
paperless, without ID?
Without ID, completely invisible, completely neglected by the system. I think it's something that, we are seeing every day, we are facing every day, and it was only normal for me to tackle this issue and not only be angry about it. It was fueled in the beginning by an anger, but I decided to do something about this anger, and it started with wanting to understand more, wanting to know more. How did we fail? How did the system fail? Where did the system fail? Why is it completely excluding these people and not finding any solutions for them? So I wanted to understand more, and that's how it started. I started, going.
It started one night, you said?
Yes. It was, one night I was coming back from some kind of dinner or party, and I saw this lady on the street. She was on the sidewalk, a very tight, very tiny sidewalk between two roads, and she had a baby with her. He was maybe 1 year and a half. And he was trying to sleep. The only thing he needed in the world was just to close his eyes and sleep, and he couldn't sleep. And he was, just
nodding off.
Yeah. And I was, so angry. And I was thinking, this kid just wants to sleep. He doesn't want anything else in the world but to sleep. And it hit me. His playground for the next maybe 2-3 years, I don't know, is going to be that narrow sidewalk between two roads. That's the only thing he knows. He can't even walk, because if he does, he's gonna either be run over by a car, or it's his only playground. This is where he's gonna experience life. That's it. So it just struck me.
And his mother was there.
And his mother was there,
begging from the people in the cars.
Yeah. I omitted to tell you that small detail, that she was begging. And so I came back and I drew the face of a child shouting at adults. And it all started from there. So I started doing research and wanting to understand why, how. I went to many places, very difficult places in Lebanon. I spent the last 4 years, going to court, wanting to understand, how does the system work? How does the system try to find solution for these kids, or try to find a structure for these kids? What happens when a kid like that is facing abuse or facing neglect? Where does he go? How do we treat this problem? And I went to many other places, like prisons for minors, detention centers for minors, talking to kids, wanting to understand their point of view on life, and talking a lot to them, and most of the time I used to ask them, are you happy to be alive? And 99% of the answers were no, I'm not. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know am I just here to be punished? Is this my aim? Is this my reason to be living? Why I can't eat when I'm hungry? Why I can't find the affection I want, the love I want, I deserve? And so there was a lot of anger in most of these kids, and that's how it turned into this story of this kid who was going to sue his parents, but through suing his parents, he's suing the whole system and asking why.
Because the film has a startling premise. I mean, a 12-year-old boy stands up in court and declares that he's suing his parents for giving him life. What happened to him? What would bring a child to that point?
Exactly. What leads these children to say, I'm not happy to be alive? I wish I was dead. Most of them tell you, I wish I was dead. And a lot of them try to commit suicide. So that's what I wanted to understand. What leads them to say that? And then the story in the film, you understand what leads him to say that and where he comes from. And you know, all the little anecdotes and the stories that he goes through, these are things I've seen through the research situations. We tried, my co-writers and I, we tried to be very close to reality, as close to reality as possible. So everything you see in the film, reality unfortunately is harsher than what you see in the film, is much harsher. But sometimes, you know, out of respect, you don't show everything, and you don't go too extreme in what you're seeing. But these kids are facing very, very, very harsh and extreme situations.
You think it would be just too hard for the viewer?
Yes, I think it would. It's already hard.
It's already hard.
It's already hard for the viewer, but reality is even harder, much harder than that. And I wanted to just talk about it and just put this problem out there and see how can we find a solution. I know it's very difficult to find solutions, and I'm not the one who's going to find solutions, but I want to create some kind of debate. I want to create some kind of awareness of the situation. I mean, awareness, of course the awareness is there. People know this problem exists, but I want to be able, you know, to talk about it out loud, at least to try to find some kind of solution. Or at least in my country, which is a small country where things are possible, I think. It's possible to change a few laws. It's possible to work on a structure that is able to take these kids' problems into consideration and find solutions for them.